Great. So I guess we should probably start maybe by introducing ourselves. So I'm Lydia Bangura. I am studying vocal performance. I'm a soprano from Phoenix, and yeah, here doing research as well as singing. I don't know if you guys want to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, sure. My name is Corinne Costel. I am a second year graduate student at CCPA. I'm also a soprano, and I don't know what else to say besides that, yes. Also studying some research.
Yeah.
My name is Tori Darnell, and I did my first year of my master's at CCPA in voice performance, and also did a research project through OSM.
Great. So I would just love for us, especially because this is going to be obviously live right now, but recorded and put on the website. Ooh, my light turned off.
Oh no. Okay. There we go. Let there be light.
So because this is going to be recorded and put on the OSR blog later, we just, like I said, this whole week is really trying to appeal to students in all different areas of study, especially undergraduates, in order to introduce like the idea of research and scholarship into their education and how it can be relevant to them, exciting to them, and how research is really so multifaceted and can look like so many different things. So I think the first thing that we should start with is just kind of talking a bit about the research that we've been doing and our own paths to discovering our projects and research and just all of our interactions with the OSR. So how about we start with Tori, since she's our, seasoned professional.
Yeah, so as far as beginning the research process, it started from kind of a personal interest. I started studying music in high school, which was also around the time that I learned that I had obsessive compulsive disorder. And so my time studying music, I was really tuned in to how it was affecting my mental health in a positive way and what it did for me. And I also realized that there was this really beautiful community around music too. Articulate how I felt about music, why I was so drawn to it, and why I so often wanted to think about it in relation with mental health. So when I got to Roosevelt and I had a class actually with Dr. Kerr in Style and Lit, he mentioned the OSR, and I had this idea for a while. And then I went into his office one day and I said, I have an idea. It might be bad, but what can I do with this? How can I explore it? And then I was directed to the Office of Student Research, and I worked with Allegra on it as well. So the research project ended up being a focus on making mental health resources accessible to the community through music performance, and connecting those two communities along with mental health professionals and advocacy groups.
Great, thank you for sharing. Yeah, Corinne, if you want to talk just a little bit about, I know that you're very much obviously in the beginning stages of developing what your project is going to be, but just along the same lines of like, this is how I encountered the OSR and how I began to kind of narrow my focus as far as what you want to do.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that the three of us are together because I feel like we've kind of influenced each other in a lot of different ways. I think like Tori, you influenced Lydia, and Lydia, you influenced me to kind of go down this path. I hadn't really thought about any sort of additional topic of interest besides just performance. And we'll get into that later about like the idea of branching out a little bit. But this summer in particular, after the George Floyd protests, I had discussions with Lydia about how the civil unrest also kind of spans into the realm of opera and in classical performance and in all types of professionalism experiences, and how quite dangerous and harmful it can be as a young approaching singer to kind of enter the field without really any knowledge of how to be a proper ally. And I felt so conflicted in entering school again, feeling like almost like helpless, or that I wasn't doing anything, or not feeling like I was really just doing enough to be that person. So my goal was to try to like kind of connect the dots, not only for myself and my own purposes, but also for my colleagues at Roosevelt and beyond that, the university level as well. So talking to Lydia and having her kind of discuss her project as well, and how she felt like it was the best path for her at the time, really kind of got me inspired to really try to expand my horizons essentially, and to try to think outside the box. And that's when I started thinking about receiving like an OSR grant in order to really execute a great project in which I could feel a little bit more dedicated to and have like a little bit more tools in my toolbox essentially. So that's where I'm at. I'm currently in the starting phases of this said research. And right now I'm looking at different resources that will help me cater a greater experience for people to feel more confident in approaching professional situations, not only in the rehearsal room, but as well as with certain problematic experiences that we have in opera and in particular, but also in other performance spheres as well. So right now I'm kind of just thinking about my proposal and thinking about like how I'm going to really execute this and make this something that I can have in my back pocket for my next step of education, which is something I hadn't thought about previous to this summer, really. So that's where I'm at. And yes.
Great. Thank you for sharing. I know over the summer we also had some discussions about like resources and books and things that you read again in Dr. Kerr's class. I feel like all of us are like connected to so shout out to Dr. Kerr for in some way influencing all of our research. But as far as, yeah, my journey with the OSR, I basically was approached by Dr. Kerr and Dr. Hussey, which, you know, was a new experience for me to think about research. I had never really considered it at all. But to have them kind of approach me and say, you know, oh, essentially we could tell that you're kind of interested in other aspects of music. Do you want to engage in that? And I had an existential crisis around like, oh, but I'm only a performer with a life on the stage. And I had like a very dramatic, it was a really standout moment for me in my education to now suddenly be thinking and be presented with like, oh, also there's this whole other thing. It doesn't mean that you have to not love performing anymore or not be devoted to that or your studies as a performance major, but like you have the freedom to do this other thing if that would interest you. And so through the process of like developing my proposal and figuring out exactly what we were gonna do, I kind of narrowed it down to researching music theory pedagogy. So my project is all just based around the ways that we approach teaching music students music theory, and why so many students seem to really struggle with it or seem to find it really the adversary, or kind of the opposite or the antagonist to music performance or musical passion and expression, and why so many students feel like it's like this really lifeless, boring, difficult thing, rather than going hand in hand with performance the way that I have always intrinsically received it. And I think that really has a lot to do with education. And so my research this summer, I'm finishing up my proposal right now and intend to present at the research symposium, shameless plug, next month, the 3rd week of October. And it kind of centered all around like what are the different approaches and the different ways that we're introducing students to music theory in order to, not only get them to just like not hate it, but also to be actively willing to engage and to see it connected to their studies and performance, and that really one can enhance the other. So that's a little bit about my research and how I kind of fell into it. And I thought now we can kind of move into, Corinne touched on it a little bit, that idea of like success in music and what that really looks like as far as our education as performers. And so I'll just kind of start with a general question and then we can talk about it and break it down, but kind of how do you guys feel that the idea of success as a performer has been articulated to you or instilled in you, especially during like your undergraduate experience?
I would love to jump in if that's okay. Yeah, I think I've had a very similar experience to a lot of my colleagues. I've discussed this kind of with most of our class at CCPA, and we have this idea that like performing is kind of all that we are essentially in the professional sense. And at least for my experience in undergrad, I was basically told that if I wasn't going to take this seriously with everything I had, then I wasn't going to make it. And if I had other interests, that I should just pursue that and not go into the realm of performance, which to some degree I do understand because it is a very serious field and it's a highly competitive field, especially for sopranos. And it's hard to break in. And especially if you're not going to commit, it can be very, very difficult. However, that kind of geared me towards a path that really put on blinders essentially to my academic interests, in which I did like music history, I did like music theory, I did enjoy like the academic aspects of being in university, but I was only geared towards like auditions and making a website or like improving my resume and only focusing on those key aspects, without kind of encouraging myself to step outside of the box and pursue something that might interest me more, or if not the same, and that could also help me improve my performance aesthetic, essentially. So I think this is a really interesting time for me personally, to kind of allow myself to explore these different sides of academia, especially since for my own purposes, mine does have to do with performance and like the rehearsal experience and the like just opera in particular. And so for me, I felt like I can use both performance and research to kind of help encapsulate one more well-rounded person, not only in performance, but also research as well. And I think that's something that's not really encouraged in a lot of academic senses. And so that's mostly why we're having this talk today, to kind of discuss the benefits, not only in exploring something that might help improve your performance, but also might steer you into a different direction that might be even more fulfilling. So that's where we're at, kind of.
Yeah, Corinne kind of hit the main points that I think we all experience, especially in undergrad getting our performance degree. Just to kind of back up that statement, personally, when I started having these interests in other things, particularly mental health and music, I had to overcome this thought within myself that was kind of around like, you know, if I have the other interests, then I don't care about performance enough. I'm not enough of a performer. And like Corinne said, you tend to put blinders onto your other interests to, you know, either prove yourself in the field or to solidify your position as a performer. And I know that that was instilled in me from my experience in undergrad, hearing things like, well, if you're interested in something else and you decide to pursue that as well, you have a plan B, and a plan B is an out. And that's not necessarily true. And we were talking yesterday kind of about this, but oftentimes we're presented with this binary solution. You're either a performer or you're not. But this opportunity with the Office of Student Research, you know, made me see that I can be both. And, you know, performance is actually informed by all of the different things in your life and what you put into it. And I think that if there's a kernel of curiosity that you feel when you're starting out your music studies, it's really important to follow that and let it grow and nurture it at the same time that you're nurturing being a musician, because oftentimes they're connected, and it can lead you to a more fulfilling path.
Right, yeah, thank you both. It's so interesting that in music studies, really right once you start, whether you're like, you know, a 5-year-old pianist or like, or, you know, a lot of singers tend to start later when our voices start to develop and things like that. But really right whenever you start, and especially during your undergraduate degree, like the studies are so specialized right off the bat and very specific, which to me almost strikes me as the opposite of like the spirit of the undergraduate experience. Like it's supposed to be you know, very exploratory. It's supposed to be like, you know, you're becoming a young professional, you're you know, becoming an adult that's going to enter the workforce. And so like part of developing as a human is being able to explore a lot of different avenues, and the fact that right when you get into you know, a college program or university, the studies are so specific. It is it's just such a strange way that we operate, obviously to develop students for careers in music, but you know, it really begs the question, like, how exactly are we doing that? And you know, what are we preparing them for? It's kind of it can be kind of a narrow idea of what students will actually encounter once they graduate school. And so a few like resources that I found for this, one is by a woman named Courtney Crapple, and she wrote this article called Considering Careers in Music, about her journey as far as discovering that an academic music career was the right path for her. And kind of like me and like all of us, like she didn't encounter research or the idea of being a professor or giving talks, contributing to a textbook, like so many different facets of the way that you can academically contribute to music. She didn't encounter any of that until she was in graduate school. And it's like, why is that, you know, why is that the case? Why are we waiting until students are already in an even more specialized degree to introduce like, oh, now you can do this whole other thing? That explains why I had such a crisis. Like I had never at the, you know, to wait until I'm, you know, 24 to be like, oh, actually, so this thing that you've been doing for years and years, your entire life, you could also go this other way. That would be totally fine. I would have appreciated if someone would have said that to me when I was like 18 or 19, and I might have had a better idea as far as the trajectory of where I'm headed in all the different ways that I want to engage music if I had been shown that there were ways, you know, at an earlier point in my education. So she does a really good job and has some books and stuff that she's recommended for like how you might decide if that's the path that you want to head down and things like that. So I can link all the stuff that we found in the chat. But yeah, it really just begs that question, like, well, why would you wait until they're already in grad school? You know, it seems a bit opposite to what we're actually trying to instill. And that leads really well too into kind of our third section of what we're going to talk about, which is, you know, I'll ask like another broad question and then we'll kind of break it down as far as like, what is the role, I guess, of professors and of like applied teachers, and what are they trying to prepare us for?
I think this is a pretty difficult question to really break down, but because obviously we're not in the kind of role of being a professor at this time, so can't speak from experience. However, I do know that I've had professors, especially in undergrad, who have recognized my like different abilities from other people, and I've had conversations with said professors about my interests, and never really got to the point where they encouraged me to explore different options. They knew I was in a pretty serious studio, that my voice teacher was very, very like one track mind. So that might have influenced them to not say anything to me about exploring different options. However, I think it would have been an interesting thing to keep in mind approaching grad school and thinking about like, why am I even applying to grad school, right? So I think a lot of us, especially Spranos, feel the pressure to go to grad school because otherwise like you won't have a career kind of thing. That's the kind of dialogue that I've only remembered having. So for me, I felt like I needed to apply to grad school just to be in grad school, and didn't take into consideration what it meant to be in school and what would be helpful for me during my time at graduate school, especially since a 2-year program flies by like that. Like, I can't believe that we're like almost 3/4 of the way done after the semester. So it's really crazy. And so for such a short time, and like Lydia mentioned, having such a specialized program that is like you're only focusing on performance, actually, like that is it, is really interesting to like now just be thinking like, oh wow, I can do other things and I can approach topics of discourse with like more research in my back pocket. You know, I can do other things that won't necessarily detract me from performance, but almost enhance it. So it's not just like oh, you can do performance or something else. Like like Tori had mentioned, excuse me, that having like a plan B or a way out is kind of like really difficult to try to talk to students like that. I don't know. I think as a professor, I think it should be encouraging in the way that it's like there is more out there, and there are so many ways in which you can explore your options and find what interests you that might steer you in a different direction, or it could help propel you towards what your overarching goal is. Like for me, I still love to perform and still want to perform as like a career. However, I think having my research to kind of back me and moving forward into the professional world, having something not only that like diversifies my resume, but also makes me feel more confident in approaching a performance and rehearsal space, will make me feel all the more like well-rounded and more fulfilled. And I wish that a professor had talked to me in the sense of, where is your head at? What are you thinking? How are you feeling about performance? Like, does it make you feel good still? Does it, you know, because we, especially as young professionals, like between the ages of like 18 and 24, like our minds are so active all the time, and we're growing so much in those first few years of the college experience that it's okay to kind of change your mind or just evolve it, and allowing students to feel comfortable in that sense of like, we can talk about this and it's not like you're giving up or throwing it away or anything like that. It's what is shaping you, what is making you feel the best you that you can be, and making it feel like it's not like pulling back the reins and kind of like jumping ship or anything, but instead kind of just like navigating towards a more productive use of your own time, just because we are spending so much money like at university. Like, it should be fulfilling in a multitude of ways. And so I feel like, since we don't really have like any actual active experience as professors, like it's hard to really like engage in that sense. But at the same time, like I know that I would have really appreciated someone approaching me and having that really safe kind of environment to talk about these kinds of things, rather than feeling like, oh, I can only do this and I can't question anything, or I can't feel like nervous about this, or like that I'm questioning things. So that's kind of my viewpoint on that.
Yeah, just along with the environment that Corinne was describing as beneficial to students. I mean, I think there's something really magical about being surrounded by educators that are invested in your growth as a student, as a person, and if those interests are outside of music even. You know, being viewed as a person outside of applied lessons is a huge component in it. And even if those professors don't have the resources that directly pertain to your interests that you express outside of music, maybe it's just an issue of support at that point. And at some point it feels like, especially when I was younger and in my undergrad, it felt like I needed permission to do things sometimes, or to explore things. And I feel that with more support behind interests outside of music, I would have felt more empowered to explore those things on my own and not wait until I was waking up in the middle of the night and this idea kept coming to me and bothering me. Not bothering me, but it was there until I couldn't ignore it anymore. So I think that as far as the role of professors and applied teachers, if there's curiosity there, it might be just supporting that always, no matter what, even if it's outside of what, you know, students are quote unquote there to do, because you never know what that's going to turn into. And luckily we have been surrounded by educators who do take that into account. I experienced that in my undergrad, but I think if it was more of a sturdy network, if you're going from class to class and you're hearing this idea to explore, and you're hearing that that's okay, and the culture changes, I think that is the most important part that an educator can do right now.
Yeah, I think it really, it comes down to the idea of like, what is being absorbed by the student through what, you know, the professors are saying and not saying. And when you are interacting with your teacher through applied lessons and things like that, like it is their job, obviously, to prepare you to be a professional musician, right? So it is their job to instill the technique, right, and the skills and the rep and the knowledge and the right, that's what they're there to do, and that's hopefully what the student is there to learn. But that's a music teacher's job, but it's also an educator's job to foster thinkers, right? And to to instill in students the ability to think creatively, the ability to take charge of their own education and their own careers, like the ability to choose what they want to do and clearly articulate what they want to do. And like it's as much the role of an applied voice teacher to prepare you technically and musically as it is to prepare your mind to be a working professional and to be a creative thinker and an artist in music. And so it really begs the question as far as like, how are music teachers and applied teachers really taking on that job to train minds to think higher and to think bigger, going forward, especially right now in music, as far as like, obviously the last 10 or 20 years, like that idea of like diversifying your skill set and things like that, the idea of just like going out and trying to be just a performer, it's really difficult. And so there's so much that has changed in just like 21st century music and so many different ways that young artists can engage in music. But now, obviously, with coronavirus going forward, what are the next 2 years going to look like? Next 5 years? We don't know. And so there's a lot in addition that it's a huge job now that professors and that applied teachers now have taken on of preparing us not only for like the world of 21st century music, classical music, and like what it looks like to be a performer in that space, but also going forward with so many new parameters around what music performance can be and what it is continuing to develop into and what it will continue to develop into over the next 5 years. It's gonna be so radically different than anything that we've ever had to encounter before and anything that we've ever needed to be prepared for. And so, you know, it's it's such a strange space to navigate and a huge job that now professors are having to take on. Like, what does it look like to prepare students for now like a virtual performance career and so many new things that we haven't thought about. But you know, it is still the job of higher education, right, of the education system to prepare minds and to create thinkers and doers and students that are well-rounded and thinking through like all the possibilities that their future can be because of their education. So yeah, I have more resources and stuff that I will put in the chat at the end, but kind of just to like wrap it up with some other thoughts of future maybe discussions and things like that we can bring to the table. Stay tuned for our podcast. But you know, just as far as like, because teachers aren't the only facets of a student's educational experience, right? And what students ultimately decide to do with their education, that doesn't all have to do with the teachers. I think it's a large part of it, but there are so many different things from, you know, from like how much does representation matter, right? In like looking at the types of students, right, that their colleagues, and also the types of professors and things that they're encountering, to be able to look forward and say like, could I see myself in that career if I don't see anybody that looks like me, right? Or I don't see anybody that it doesn't look like a space that's easily accessible for me. So even speaking to research and to my own experience, like I, you know, from Arizona, and I didn't have a professor of color until I was a senior in college. And to be when I took a Latin American music class that was taught by a professor from Mexico, and you know how that shaped my mind subconsciously, right, about like again, not only was I being told by my applied teacher and by other professors that like performance is what I'm supposed to do and how I'm supposed to move forward, always in pursuit of performance, I was also, you know, receiving this message that like there's not even a space for me in research or like in music theory or in these spaces that I find interesting. And so part of it, the educational experience as well, is I think Corinne said earlier that the ability, or no, which one of you said it? The ability to change your mind, right? And to pivot. Was that Tori? Or was that I don't remember who said it. But that ability to pivot and to change your mind, and music is so unique in that it really involves a lot of like building your future career with so many different facets of like all the ways you can engage music. So like the idea of developing your own way and your own path, and the fact that there's no one way to do it and no one way to get here or there, it's just your path. And so refusing to compare that to the experience of your professors or of your colleagues, just the constant check-in of like, how do I feel about what I'm studying? Is there something that I want to add? Like, is there something that I want to take away? Is there something I want to do that's different completely that I've never done before, but I just want to try it this semester? And that's the only reason that you need. And so that idea of like making your own path and creating your own way and being the first, if that's what it calls for in your case, like I'm going to make the path to be, you know, someone who's in that space, even though I don't see myself represented, and even though it feels like it is not accessible to me or my experience. Music is so unique in that way, that you can always be in that mode of play and that mode of like it can always be exploratory, as if you're just like always a freshman and always, you know, being like, now I'm going to do early music, now I'm going to do this thing, now I'm going to write this thing, right? And it's, if we choose to think about it in that way and choose to instill that in students, the idea that it can always be exploratory throughout your entire career, I think that it has the potential to make the educational experience for students that much brighter. I'm rambling. I don't know if either of you two want to jump in with a thought before I keep talking.
I was just going to say, just along with like representation and not seeing yourself in the field and maybe being the first to forge your path, I think the mentorship opportunity that comes with working through the OSR and you having that advisor on your project is such an important part of making your path. I had the like absolute gift of working with Allegra, and I mean, there are just powerful minds that you can work with that will help you shape that path, even if you don't know what it looks like because it is new. But, you know, the mentors bring this experience into it. And when you're nervous, when you're afraid to make a step, when it's hard to distill your thoughts and ideas, having Allegra, having like that resource, and Dr. Carey even, was just incredibly important to the development, even when I felt afraid to develop it on my own, or even when it felt like I didn't belong in the research sphere. That mentorship was incredibly powerful, and that's something to look forward to when you do get involved in research as well.
Yeah, kind of jumping off of that as well, Tori, I think we are really in a great position here at Roosevelt because we are surrounded by so many amazing professionals who are great resources in order to help really foster those feelings and those trajectories. And I think part of my ideas towards research really also developed last semester during our class on performance with Dr. Care, shout out, and reading so many different source materials about performance in general and the discourse that is involved with live performance that was really engaging mentally on so many levels. And also our style and lit course I took with Dean Berna. And it was one class in particular that stood out to me that really, like, I had to sit with it for the weekend kind of thing. And I was like, wow, I need to really think about this, because I forget which resource we were discussing in class. However, I do remember Dean Berna mentioning, like, when do we achieve creative authority? Like, when do we get to, as young professionals, allow ourselves to be a voice and say, no, this is what I have to bring, like, get to bring to the table. This is what I think. This is how I feel about it. Especially singers in particular, you know, we are kind of told, like, this is the interpretation. This is how you sing this passage. This is how you look when you show up to an audition. We are told so many things of how to be in so many ways that sometimes it's hard to imagine yourself making creative choices for your own good and getting to be like, I'm not going to sing it like that. The conductor can do whatever they want. Like, I'm going to do it like this. Like, there are so many instances of that happening. And it's like, when do we get to do that? And the answer is, there really isn't a time for that. There isn't like a one, you know, since this is such a non-linear, you know, abstract kind of field that you kind of just have to maneuver in your own way. I think it's really important to keep in the back of your mind how approaching music even looks and how approaching your own professional goals really looks. And it's something that, like, the time is now kind of thing. And especially what Lydia was discussing about, like, what performance and music will even look like for the next few years is really ambiguous and kind of scary. And I think, like, now is the time to really have you, like, be your own advocate for your own education and having the authoritative power for your own good. And whatever that looks like, if it is just a performance track, that is, like, totally valid. That's obviously not the point of this. Is to be like, don't be a performer. Like, that's not correct either. But, like, if it does look like performance, that is totally fine. But it can look like so many other have so many other faces. You know, we have such a nuanced and complex type of field that there isn't a right or wrong answer for how you become a professional. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. And, you know, approaching research can be a little bit daunting and intimidating, especially since it's not really quite talked about in a lot of senses. But I think it's something that can be so engaging and so fulfilling. And especially at Roosevelt, there are so many people here that I didn't even know about until, like, after my first year ended, that, you know, that you can talk to these people and everyone's on your side and in your corner and going to encourage you to become the best professional that you can be. So.
Yeah, I think unless you guys have any other thoughts, that's basically it. I'm gonna put all the stuff that we referenced in the chat.
I just wanted to say this is really great to hear this, and I think, you know, what Corinne's talking about at the end is with these OSR fellowships, what I've noticed over the last couple of years is it is about that authority. You could almost call it agency, right? Creative agency. You know, and the OSR has changed their names of these, of what you were going to call it, research or critical inquiry. And that's all of a reflection of the fact that it's not just old school research. It's about reflection, scholarship, creative reflection and inquiry that actually ultimately creates a kind of agency for many of the fellows that I've noticed. Some of the fellows have not changed their career paths. Corinne is very right. But they're more conscious of why they're on those paths. And many performers think they have agency, but they don't. They just happen to be singing really well, so people hire them a lot, for instance. But they're not necessarily conscious of their role in it. And so creative agency is a really important part. I think you can only get that through often you get that through a more multifaceted approach to learning and engagement. So I think what these fellowships have a real potential for developing. And that's why all three of these projects are so different in their scope and their aims. Yeah.
Yay! Well, thank you for coming. And you know, we're glad that this could take place. And as we kind of talked about in the wrap up, there's so many. We touched on everything so like it was very all over the place, very broad. We realize, but it, you know, we'd love the opportunity to maybe further the discussion and really narrow down some of the ideas that we touched upon and have real and constructive discussions about what it looks like to introduce research at an earlier time, or what it looks like to better empower students to build their education around what they want. So hopefully there will be plenty of future talks and future opportunities and things. We should interview Dr. Kerr. That's what we should do. You should tell us about your research, Dr. Kerr.
No, it's okay. We can do it another time.
Yeah, so yes, maybe a future interview. But yeah, I think that's it for us.
Yeah.
I wanted to just thank you guys for you know, joining in and talking about your projects and their development, but also, I mean, just the projects themselves really, I mean, I think as you've said yourselves, show these areas where, you know, there is a role for inquiry into the work you're doing, and there is space also to, without, you know, over explaining each kind of creative decision, there is space for greater kind of inquiry and thought about the connections between inquiry and practice as well. And just to show also practice as a space, or, you know, as praxis as somewhere I think would use in order to talk about that connection between inquiry and thought and how something is carried out. So it's, you know, it's a joy to work with you guys, and the little role I can have as you're, you know, just describing your projects and also connecting your projects to, I don't want to call research the umbrella, because I think that just puts something on it that doesn't belong there, but maybe, you know, inquiry and scholarship and reflection, not scholarship, as I almost said. Edit that out.
Well, yes, thank you so much for, you know, inviting us to be a part of the week. And, you know, Corinne and I have class. We should probably go. But yeah, but thank you so much. And thank you, Tori, our guest of honor, for speaking on you. We got her at the last second. We were like, please come talk to us. So but yeah, thank you all for being here, and we appreciate it.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank
Final
you.
Final plug is that applications have just opened for the fall 2020 cycle, and we'll be holding workshops to support students in developing those along the way. So check back on the blog.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.